Pacific D-Day. In the campaigns of 1943 and the first half of 1944, the Allies had captured the Solomon Islands, the Gilbert Islands, the Marshall Islands, and the Papuan Peninsula of New Guinea. This left the Japanese holding the Philippines, the Caroline Islands, the Palau Islands, and the Mariana Islands. The Imperial Japanese Navy in World War II, at the beginning of the Pacific War in December 1941, was the third most powerful navy in the world, and the Naval Air Service was one of the most potent air forces. Most of the Japanese Army, 27 divisions, were stationed in China at the beginning of the Second World War. Japanese troops suffered from a shortage of supplies, especially food, medicine, munitions, and armaments, largely due to the submarine interdiction of supplies and losses to Japanese shipping, which was worsened by a long-standing rivalry with the Imperial Japanese Navy. The lack of supplies caused large numbers of fighter aircraft to become unserviceable for lack of spare parts, and as many as 2/3 of Japan's total military deaths resulted from illness or starvation. June 5, 1944, is what we now know as the Pacific D-Day. The day before Operation Overlord in Europe was launched, the U.S. Pacific Fleet departed Pearl Harbor in retaliation for the December 7th attack. The Battle of Saipan was a battle of the Pacific campaigns of World War II fought on the island of Saipan in the Mariana Islands from June 15th to July 9th, 1944, as part of Operation Forager. The bombardment of Saipan began on June 13th, 1944, with the 7 fastest battleships, 11 destroyers, and 10 fast minesweepers under Vice Admiral Willis A. Lee, Jr. The battleships delivered 2,400 16-inch shells, but to avoid potential minefields, fire was from a distance of 10,000 yards or more, and the crews were inexperienced in shore bombardment. The landings began at 0700 on June 15, 1944. More than 300 LVTs landed, 8,000 troops. With tactical artillery preparation, flags were placed in a lagoon to indicate the range, which allowed the Japanese to destroy about 20 amphibious tanks, and they had placed barbed wire, artillery, machine gun emplacements in trenches to maximize the American casualties. On the west coast of Saipan, about 0900, 11 fire support ships covered the marine landings. The invasion surprised the Japanese High Command, which had been expecting the attack further south. Admiral Shigetaro Shimada, Commander-in-Chief of the Imperial Japanese Navy, saw an opportunity to use the Ago Force to attack the U.S. Navy forces around Saipan. On June 15th, he gave the order to attack, but the resulting battle of the Philippine Sea was a disaster for the Imperial Japanese Navy, which lost 3 aircraft carriers and hundreds of planes. Fierce fighting. Without resupply, the Battle of Saipan was hopeless for the defenders, but the Japanese were determined to fight to the last man. Lieutenant General Yoshitsugu Saito of the Imperial Japanese Army organized his troops in a line anchored on Mount Tapacho in the defensible mountainous terrain of central Saipan. Essentially, it was a valley surrounded by hills and cliffs under Japanese control. The nicknames were given by the Americans to the features of the battle: Hell's Pocket, Purple Heart Ridge, and Death Valley, indicate the severity of the fighting. The Japanese used many caves in the volcanic landscape to delay the attackers by hiding during the day and making sorties at night. The Americans gradually developed tactics for clearing the caves by using flamethrower teams supported by artillery and machine guns. By July 6th, the Japanese had nowhere to retreat. Saito made plans for the final suicide banzai charge. On the fate of the remaining civilians on the island, Saito said, "There is no longer any distinction between civilians and troops. It would be better for them to join the attack with bamboo spears than be captured." At dawn of July 7th, a group of 12 men carrying a red flag in the lead, the remaining able-bodied troops, about 4,000 men, charged forward in the final attack. Behind them came the wounded with bandaged heads, crutches, and barely armed. The Japanese surged over the American front lines, engaging both Army and Marine units. The Americans suffered over 650 killed or wounded. The attack on July 7th would be the largest banzai charge in the Pacific War. In the end, almost the entire garrison of troops on the island, at least 29,000, died. For the Americans, the victory was the most costly to date in the Pacific War. Out of 71,000 who landed, 2,949 were killed and 10,464 wounded. Further resistance. Although major fighting had officially ceased on July 9th, pockets of Japanese resistance continued. In September of 1944, U.S. Marines began patrols into the island interior in order to bring civilians and soldiers still holding out in the jungles. A group led by Captain Sake Aoba managed to evade capture for more than 512 days until surrendering to the Americans on December 1st, 1945, 3 months after the official surrender of Japan. U.S. Marines gave Oba the nickname the Fox. In February 2011, a film about Oba, The Last Samurai, was released in Japan. Turning point. With the capture of Saipan, the American military was now only 1,300 miles away from the home islands of Japan. U.S. Marine Corps General Holland Smith said it was the decisive battle in the Pacific Offensive. It opened up a way to the Japanese home islands. The victory would prove to be one of the most important strategic moments during the war in the Pacific theater, as the Japanese archipelago was now within striking distance of the U.S.'s B-29 bombers. Thank you for watching War Machine. Please like and subscribe. Thank you.